Uh, Hi, uh, welcome to everyone for this talk. So, as you guessed, we want to present why we set up a new container registry for the Kubernetes project. So this is mainly a quick presentation of what we did over the last 6 months for the new container registry. So this is a quick chat with 3 of us. I'm Arnaud. I'm the SIG chair of the SIG K8s-Infra. This is Ben, SIG chair of SIG testing, and this is Adolfo, one of the technical lead for SIG release. So we're basically trying to have a quick chat with people about the container registry.
All right, so if anyone is aware, we recently had several changes across many repositories in the Kubernetes organization to switch the host name where that serves the images for the project and also some of those smaller projects. So we wanted to give you a quick overview of why that was and what we tried to achieve and the tooling behind it. So I'm going to start with a super quick intro to how we publish the images in the project. So if anyone, I'm sure most people here are aware that the images in Kubernetes are built in a Proud job. And when Proud builds your images, it usually sends them to a staging registry. And why do they get to a staging registry? Because people and machines will build images for all kinds of reasons, not just for releasing for public consumption. Sometimes you release them as part of a periodic job or testing, many other reasons, and not necessarily release artifacts. So when you want to release an image to the public so that they can use it in their projects or their clusters, they need to move to a production registry. And if you think about it, there needs to be some sort of control of which images get moved to the production registries, because you don't want anybody in the project to allow to push images to the public. And this is where image promotion happens. Image promotion is basically just a process that captures the community and all of the stakeholders' approval to make sure that images move from staging to production. Once they're in the production registries, they become read-only, and no one has access to change them, not even the tags. So once the stakeholders approve the image promotion, it basically gives that the seal of approval from the community, and the image moves to production. Once we have them there, we sign the images with SIGStore, and then they get published to the public. And this is like a super simplified view. What has been happening until just recently was that we had been publishing this to 3 regional Google Cloud registry regions. And the ugly reality, or the cost of success, as Arnaud is about to say, is there's not just 9 users pulling them, it's a lot of users pulling the same image from each of the registries, and serving all of those people costs quite a lot of money, as, Arnaud's about to explain.
So why we did this, and I think this slide will present possible technical reason to do that, like improve latency between the origin and the entity consuming the container registry. And all of those answers are wrong. We didn't do that for technical reason. We basically do that because money. So this is an alert we get on October 21. So this is last week, and we already spent 90% of the monthly budget on the infrastructure because the container registry. And we get an alert, I think, 10 days before the end of the month. So we already monthly over budget because we serve the container registry for everyone consuming it. And this is the report for last year. So for last year, and when I say last year, January 1st to December 1, we spent more than 1 million paying GCP for network egress. And that's a lot. That was last year 30% of the budget. And there's like, what's remaining is for the CI and everything. So the main reason is, okay, Kubernetes is a successful project. I think no one can deny that. We were successful too early because we are like 7 years compared to other projects like the Linux Foundation, Postgres, and stuff like that. So this is the main reason. We want to try to control costs. And this is like an example of like, this is the billing of last month, September, and you will notice like, there's like, those lines are not really explicit because we just list service project. So the project hosting the existing controller registry is called K8s-Infra prod, and we spend like, this is like, basically the number is high per month. When you multiply that for 12 months, you get an idea of what we're paying for the distribution of the container images. So anyone pulling, have periodic job trying to pulling for this registry, anyone using kind in their environment to do dev, any company building distribution based on of the project, we basically serve all of them. And that's the one reason we basically decide to build a new distribution platform to control that cost. So how this is technically implemented, I will give the mic to Ben.
Okay, so for a while now, we've been using case.gcr.io to host all the Kubernetes container images. As you saw earlier, there's 3 regional GCRs. This is a special thing the GCR team provided for the project. Essentially, this just looks at incoming traffic and says, oh, this should go to the US one, this should go to the Asia one, this should go to the EU one, and those are multi-regional storage. They're all GCR, so we're paying for cloud egress for any of that traffic that is not on GCP. So we set up registry.k8s.io as just a simple redirect so that we could get users pulling from a place where the Kubernetes project can control how is this distributed, how do we pay for it. We can point that domain at whatever we want in the future. Whereas right now, case.gcr.io is part of GCR's production infrastructure, and we've been working on them on what we can do with that, but ultimately it's Google production. It's not something the open source community can control. So this is what it's looked like. And this is more like what it's going to look like, because there's been one other thing this year. We're just community users, and those are multi-regional buckets here. And multi-regional buckets, GCR is a leaky abstraction over Google Cloud Storage. And Google Cloud Storage changed multi-regional pricing to reflect for the replication costs. So we are moving to regional. We're also moving to artifact registry, which is sort of the V2 product that gives us some new things, like we can actually have artifact registry enforce immutable tags for us in the future. We won't have to implement that ourselves, though we'll continue to use our tooling to be extra sure. But that doesn't do a whole lot for cost. The real thing we want to do for cost is, a while back, Amazon, some folks at Amazon talked to the SIG K8s-Infra folks, and they said, we'd like to help host our users. They're on Amazon's cloud, we'll help pay for it. So we want to offload to AWS when it's an AWS user, but we need to maintain the same level of security and trust. Beyond container registry itself, we have a bunch of tooling that like monitors the registries and ensures that you can't push to it as a human, that alerts when anything changes that isn't done by the robot, that sort of thing. So now we do this. So essentially, what we can take advantage of is when you download container images, it's actually a series of requests. And the first request is just saying, I want this tag. What is this tag? Once you resolve that through, eventually you're going to get through to a request that gives you a manifest. It's just a piece of JSON, and it says these are like the layers and the configuration for the image. So that's a very sensitive thing, but it's very low bandwidth because it's just a small bit of JSON. That JSON identifies layers based on their SHA-256 digest. So clients, when they download those layers, will actually access them by the hash, content address, and they will check the hash. This means that we can run mirrors in S3 of just the layers, and we don't even need to worry too much about securing them, vetting them, auditing them, because clients already vet whenever they download a layer. So we can offload to the clients, hey, make sure that this image isn't tampered with. As a result, we should be able to move most of our bandwidth, our egress costs, for everyone on AWS to the S3 downloads. We maintain the same properties for publishing, and we can fall back through to Artifact Registry for anything that isn't one of these requests, or if there's a layer that's missing in one of the buckets. In the future, we could extend this to other providers. This pattern should be pretty repeatable. We're basically just inspecting the client IP of the incoming traffic and saying, oh, this is Amazon client IP. Where can we route them to an Amazon copy for the bandwidth intensive part? And it doesn't need to be trusted because it's content addressed. So it's not that we don't trust Amazon, it's that we don't trust that we've built all the security tooling around monitoring this as a project so we can iterate much quicker shipping these mirrors. Any questions?
How much traffic from AWS is actually going to the AWS buckets yet?
Very little. The problem is people don't upgrade, and we only changed the default in Kubernetes in 1.25, released in August. As of yet, we haven't backported this to older releases, and users tend not to upgrade. We see a lot of traffic for very old releases. In fact, you may remember the Kubernetes project used to serve directly from a single region Google registry, gcr.io/google-containers. That registry still sees a good bit of traffic. We've frozen in place. We don't publish new things there, but it's still available and it's still being used. That's not on the community budget. It's still being paid for by Google on their internal billing, but we'll have a similar problem here. So we're in pretty active discussions right now about like, okay, how do we get people moved over? So one thing that we had been working on with the GCR team is just redirecting the old domain. It turns out, though, that a lot of people very deeply filter what they let their clusters contact. And when you do this, you break people. They get very annoyed. And they don't understand that this is the Kubernetes project. They just see GCR. And so then the GCR team is not super happy about this. So I think we're going to have to probably pull the plug on that effort. And instead, we're going to need to look at how do we get people to switch. We'll start talking about doing what we did before and only publish new tags to be accessible on Artifact Registry and not on the GCR. But at the moment, it's very small. The traffic is like the overall traffic to registry.kc.io without the redirect is only around 100 QPS. The old registry is something more like 2,500. So we're getting like 4% of the traffic, and then a subset of that we're offloading to Amazon. So it's not enough to move the needle yet. But long term, it should. And in the future, if we want to change the architecture, if we're a little bit more willing as a community to make breaking changes to, okay, you have to permit this traffic through, you're on Azure, we're going to start redirecting your Azure copy, we can roll that out quickly because it's fully project controlled. And it's our own domain, it's our own infrastructure.
Yeah. Are you doing any, because it might be kind of hard to do, but are you doing any client analysis to kind of try to understand, like, because I guess your client here would be Containerd or Docker or whatever, but to try to figure out like what tooling is driving the traffic?
So you can't directly identify that because, as you said, the client's going to be the container runtime. However, the project has had some analysis done on things like, okay, a very large percentage of the traffic is coming from Amazon, so it does make sense to like focus on this long term, especially as they're providing resources. However, there'll be other follow-up ones. In terms of tools, at best, we can look at things like market share. So we've gone to like the K8s project and asked them to say, registry.ksnA22 will be the default mirror for images as configured in the container runtime that they're shipping, because we know there's a lot of usage there. And anywhere that there's usage that isn't on GCP costs more because it's egress traffic. And in the future, it'll be anywhere that isn't GCP or Amazon for most of it. Yeah, I mean, part of the problem we have is just that the community can run on what we have money for. We don't have money per se. K8s-Infra has been funded through either engineering time or cloud credits. So with the Google Cloud credits, there's like a public program. You can see like they've donated X amount. It's on a recurring basis. We have an open billing report, and you can see all that. For other programs, they're a little bit more nascent. We don't have budgets, or like for a CDN provider, we don't have that. So like, for example, some of our other downloads, we've experimented with using Google Cloud CDN, and that does reduce costs, but only so much, and it's still all on that same credit allocation.
So that flow chart that you had up there was really interesting. Kubernetes can't be the only folks that are focusing that have this problem. So I guess I'm assuming that there's some custom code behind this to implement all of this. Is this done in a way where other folks can get usage out of it?
It's not reusable yet, but the direction that we're heading with it will make it easier to be that way. And the code is open source. If you go to registry.k8s.io, it will actually take you to the repo README, and we have the backing code there. At the moment, it's a very small stateless Cloud Run app.
Cool. And then second question here is, I think one of the things that we didn't do originally in Kubernetes that we probably should have was think about a cluster-wide registry, right? Another approach to sort of minimize the amount being downloaded is make sure that every cluster only downloads an image once, and then once it's downloaded, it gets shared across all those nodes there. Is there, any talk around starting to plumb through this idea of a image-specific registry to actually help minimize the impact and the fact that every node downloads the same thing directly from the source?
I think there's been a little bit of movement from the container runtime folks. You can configure mirrors and like all the container runtime implementations. I'm not sure about, I don't think Docker shim, because Docker to this day, you can only configure a mirror for Docker Hub. That's a problem for us as well. As Docker shim is mostly phased out in usage for Kubernetes, it's a lot easier for us to go to a tool like KOPS and say, or K8s, the Kubernetes cluster tool. We can go to K8s and we can say, configure so that it defaults to pulling through us, and they could deploy like a local caching registry, but I don't think there's a good implementation of that yet. There's a pretty recent OCI change in the past year or two that sets a header so you can actually tell like what the upstream tag it's looking for is, so you could run a wildcard registry or something like that, but right now there isn't one, and I think that you would probably need to do this through a combination of SIG node and cluster lifecycle, and SIG node stretched a bit thin at the moment. Anyone else?
Okay. So, Justin.
Do we know? Do we have an idea who is pulling this? Like, we believe GKE and EKS and AKS are probably running their own builds from their own images that are not us. We think like K8s has switched now, but not on older versions. We think, do we know who's pulling from this predominantly, and have we tried talking to them type thing?
We know, like, if they're on Amazon or if they're on GCP, The project has done analysis of the logs on the existing registry, so we can tell you that sort of thing. But there isn't anything in like the request headers that's going to identify, oh, this is coming from K-ops. And it's a little bit of a layering violation. You would need everybody's cluster tools to start telling the container runtime, which actually does the polling, oh, I'm this cluster tool, and please pass this header through.
Just as quick, I mean, we could, it's a little bit, we'd have to make sure it was okay, but like, for example, like we could say, well, K-ops pulls this other image, so we know it's an old version of K-ops, so we should yell at K-ops to go and like port their old versions, right? We can say, we see it pulls kubeproxy, we see it pulls another image like 10 seconds later. Fingerprinting, thank you.
But so at this point, for us hosting costs, the hope is that once we get everyone to start defaulting to registry.k8s.io, any further changes we should be able to do behind that domain without telling people once again, okay, we need you to move to the new thing, as long as the project is willing to say, okay, we're going to make sure, like Azure customers now have to, if they want to use our free registry, they have to permit traffic from some Azure domain or something, which is a little bit easier of a move for us to make as a project as opposed to like a subdomain of a Google product. And hopefully we don't need to get people to move again.
I think it's something like 52% are on AWS. Is this recorded?
Yes.
We're recording? Okay, I can tell you more about data later. But I spent like 3 months trying to figure out where and who was downloading those images, because they were downloading like millions of copies of them. So
you can freely talk about the percentage on the clouds. We've talked about this in recorded discussions before.
okay, yeah, it was like 52% Amazon traffic, and it was, at first we thought it was a few actors that were repeatedly pulling it, but it just turned out to be completely long tail. Just like tons of different IPs, tons of different individuals just were pulling consistently, and it wasn't like, my goal was to reach out to like a TAM internally and be like, hey, your customer is doing this. And it turned out that that wouldn't have had any impact actually. So it's just like mass usage.
Yeah, you mentioned there about different IP access policies and things like that. Is there, like as part of this, are we also now starting to define a sort of expectation? It's almost like a stability thing, right? Like we need to say that in future we may add more IPs, and there isn't really a way that you can just allow list all of these things. Or
Yeah, for the moment, we're telling people also as well to like allow all regions for these things. So like if you want to permit artifact registry, if someone comes to us and asks like, what should we let through? We're telling them you need to let through all of pkg.dev, which is artifact registry, and like Amazon Oz, because we're going to host it somewhere on Amazon, who knows what bucket. It's true. I think we made this a stable API by leaving it so long, and we also conflated it with Google's infrastructure, and that backed us into a corner on being able to make these changes. We need to be able to make these changes, and we need to accept that like this isn't a stable API. These are free images. If you're really sensitive to this as an end user, you can run a mirror.
yeah, I'm just thinking like right now we're talking about 2 clouds. You know, there are more. There are CDN providers and everything. The sooner we put out that message.
Yeah, so I mean, so far, any time anybody's come in and they've said like, I need a list of what exactly we can allow list. At most, we've told them like, you know, a couple of domains star these domains. But yeah, I mean, ideally, we continue to push back on. We're not going to tell you exactly what it is, and if that is important to you, you should be mirroring it and handling this yourself.
We have time for just one last question.
What about registries other than AKS or GCP, Azure, and Amazon?
So at the moment, we've been going with mirroring the layers because we have a lot of infrastructure built up around monitoring the GCP registry. So also we have it in like 20 regions around the globe. So we have good latency and everything, and the cost to just serve the requests of like what container image exists are not dominant. Dominant is the egress costs. That's what costs the most running these things on cloud. And they're not really meant for this as well. Like normally if you're using GCR, you'd be hosting like your company's images for your internal usage. So all those egress costs will really hit us. And we can do that with just like a bucket host, like the layers. The big reason for that is then we don't have to hand off the whole API path. If we go back to the chart, there's a very important part at the beginning where the client checks the /v2 API and checks and sees like, depending on that response code, it either gets an auth token scoped to the request or it doesn't present one. We tell it, don't present one. This is a public read registry. Everything is going to be open access, and then we can hand it off. When we try to use something like ECR, that doesn't work. You need an auth token for any API call, including any layers, and then we got to hand off the whole registry API. And then now you have to convince people in the project that like, oh, we don't have like malicious images that have made it into one of the mirrors. This way, the worst thing you can do to one of our mirrors is like delete a layer, and then we're falling back through to AR, or you can put a malformed layer, and then the client's gonna fail to download. And when we start seeing reports of that, we can just take that mirror out of the registry.
Okay, I think we are at time.
Thank you all for coming and for all the questions.